expert and researcher, and I'm really surprised that I haven't talked about his work very much so far, because I was like, I think I have a few of his books, and I have quite a few of his books actually. And I'll go through some of these, but I first heard about him in 2005 when I was in rehab, actually. I loved my therapist when I was in rehab. I went to the SLO County. Oh, I'm noticing if there's I've been having an ant problem, and I was like, did I just see an ant? Because I haven't seen an ant in a while, but I think it's okay. I went to SLO County Drug and Alcohol, and they had some interns as their therapists. And I just feel like I got really lucky with the therapist that I got. She was a Cal Poly student, but she was an older student, had returned after her own mental health and recovery journey. So she was I don't know if she was in SLO, but she was just the best. And she recommended the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. So I don't know how many of you read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. Maybe leave a comment. In that book, he talks about something called thin slicing, where he could watch John Gottman. So Malcolm Gladwell interviews John Gottman about the whole premise of Blink is like our subconscious is doing more than we realize. So we think that our rational brain is controlling all the outcomes in our life, but really it's this other part of our brain. It's really well outlined actually in the book that came a lot later, Thinking Fast and Slow, that we have different parts of the brain, the rational part does things automatically. And so first popular books on this part, that like you think you're making all your decisions, well, you're not, snap judgment part of your brain that's doing it. And so thin slicing was him interviewing John Gottman about his work. John Gottman would interview couples, and he could tell just within a few seconds whether or not a couple was going to stay together or get divorced. And so it's sort of like, I feel like Malcolm Gladwell was trying to make the point that it really, like, sometimes your intuition is really correct. Like if you can read something a lot sooner than you think you can. In Blink, they talked about how the number one thing that would determine whether or not a couple would stay together or break up, get a divorce, and they studied like thousands of couples in their relationship lab that still exists at the University of Washington in Seattle, is whether or not the couple had contempt for each other during the conversation. And so if they could subtly detect the contempt emotion with just a few seconds, then they knew that this couple would probably statistically end up in divorce, which just interviewing all these couples, seeing what, sort of labeling what came up for these couples when they were talking or resolving a conflict, and then tracking them over time to see who stayed together and who didn't. They could predict who would stay together and who wouldn't. So over many more years of research, John Gottman came up with 4 horsemen of your relationship apocalypse, or at least 4 horsemen of your conflict apocalypse. And what's so fascinating to me about these 4 horsemen is that the language used is like, this is the apocalypse. Like, this is going to end. Like we've run the numbers. If you use any 4 of these, your relationship's over. And what's so funny is that even though I had read about those in years prior, I was still doing like all of them, like probably until just a couple years ago, without really thinking, you can't do any of these. You can't do them even once. These are the apocalypse. But they all felt very normal for me to use in my, what I call like inner circle relationships. So people that get the most of our trust and the most of our intimacy. So that's our romantic partners, our parents, our siblings, these types of maybe our close friends, get to see our most raw and vulnerable side. And I would, especially with my romantic relationships, would often use all 4 of these horsemen of the apocalypse. So first, I kind of want to go over actually some of the books that I've really liked by John Gottman. This one is super, super fun and easy to read, and I wish more people would read it because it's done in like a really fun way. It's like easy, and it's great for men and women, even though it's sort of written for men. But it's the first book that I read that really helped me understand how much fear women have in our lives on a regular basis. Just because we are the victims of violence way more often, and that until men understand that women are basically living with really elevated levels of fear, that they're going to continue to not understand women. So yeah, I love this book. This one, What Makes Love Last: How to Build Trust and Avoid Betrayal. So it talks a lot about trust and betrayal, and that even micro betrayals, like if you say you're going to do the dishes and you don't, or you continually choose hanging out with your friends over hanging out with your partner. It kind of just helps people understand like the fundamentals of what makes a really good relationship. It's pretty good. This one is super, super nerdy, and I highly recommend it if you are a data science nerd like I am. So this one is kind of like the more in-depth version of this one. So this is like for any reader, and this one really gets down to the actual metrics, like how they measured the trust and how they rated the trust. Because if it's really tough to take something like a relationship and turn it into a mathematical formula that can be like measured and have the symptoms and the outcomes measured. And so this book is amazing if you've ever been kind of curious, like, well, what does trust even mean? And how can you measure it between a couple? Amazing book. And then this one is, I also read A Couple's Guide to Communication. It's an old one. He's been doing research forever. I think this book came out, I want to say the 70s, but let me see. Yeah, 76. That's so impressive. He has been doing research a long time. And this actually, because I just was like, I think I'm terrible. I think I'm terrible at communicating. Pretty sure. So literally, like, this book actually gives like specific examples of how to have different types of difficult conversations, which I really needed. Negotiating agreements, it's saying it gives lots of examples on how to do that. It's like really starting from scratch. And I really think that most of us probably do need to start from scratch. And I always just think it's so fascinating that most of us will take for granted the type of communication style that we inherited from our parents or our society, without ever wondering if there's like a better way to do it. Whereas I feel super lucky that very early on, I just knew that the way I was communicating sucked. So I've always tried to read as many communication books as I possibly could. And this one's great. Getting through a crisis, just, yeah. So I'm a huge fan of his work. And so I'm just going to go over what these 4 horsemen are. And I'm going to link to a blog that also outlines them so that you can kind of start doing your own research, and then, you can see more of his work. Cool. If you're watching live, or if you're watching the recording and you want to like or love this video, just to let me know that you're out there watching. I cannot see who has seen these and who hasn't. So I really appreciate knowing who it is that's watching. So thank you. Okay, so the 4 horsemen, meaning, when they're in the love lab, it's called, and they're watching couples talk. If any of these things comes up, this could be the apocalypse of the relationship. This is like, if these patterns keep happening and the couple doesn't change, the relationship's probably going to end. So they are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And I just feel like I've been an expert in all of those. So criticism, then voicing a complaint. right? So voicing a complaint is from a place of ownership. Like, I, and I also just, and this has really changed for me in recent years, that when I want to resolve a conflict, I come at it with such deep respect and feeling like, hey, this is feeling uncomfortable and I want us to feel closer and I want us to get closer. How can we resolve this so that we both feel better? And knowing that my partner is going to work with me on that because they want me to feel better and I want them to feel good too. I think of like partners were the enemy and they were doing this to me on purpose. They were out to get me. And this is just stuff I learned in childhood, based on the insecure attachment style that I had with my parents. That's super normal and super common. But I think also there were a lot of criticizers in my family growing up, in my family. This just seemed to be normal. And I'm guessing that it's also pretty normal, normally portrayed in the media as well. So a complaint would be, I was scared when you were running late and didn't call me. I thought we had agreed that we would do that for each other. Whereas a criticism is, you never think about how your behavior is affecting other people. I don't believe that you're forgetful. You're just selfish. You never think of others and you never think of me. So they're doing like quite a few things in this criticism because they're also doing that hyperbolic, like you never and you always, which is I always used to do that in past relationships, and it was not a very popular thing for me to do. When people start telling you who you are and what you always or never do, then it tends to lead to number 3, which is defensiveness. So it's much better to own our own side. I felt sad. I felt worried. I felt frustrated. I felt angry. And hopefully if the other person isn't a sociopath, they're going to care how you're feeling and they're going to want to make that better. And so they could say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you felt worried. Next time I'll call. The reason I didn't call is I left my phone in the car when I went into the event, or my phone died or something like that. And but I totally am hearing you. And I don't want you to feel worried because I care about you, which, if you kind of are having a partner that doesn't care how you feel, then it's time, that's not going to work. So, okay. Number 2 is contempt. When we communicate in this state, we are truly mean. We treat others with disrespect, mock them with sarcasm, ridicule, call them names, and mimic or use body language such as eye rolling or scoffing. I used to have so much of this. And, because of the way karma works, whatever we're putting out there is what we also get back. So I also used to, from certain, not all my relationships, but certain ones, I definitely got some of this, that just felt so hurtful and also just like such an impasse. It's like, okay, if you can't even respect me from a basic level, then, we're not going to be able to resolve this. We're not going to feel closer. We're going to keep, feeling far apart from each other. So, the example they give is, you're tired? Cry me a river. I've been with the kids all day running around like mad to keep this house going. And all you do when you come home from work is flop down on the sofa like a child and play those idiotic video games. I don't have time to deal with another kid. Could you be any more pathetic? Isn't that so sad? But it does sound familiar, doesn't it? I think all of us can recognize that we've heard that contemptuous voice in at least the media. I know some of you grew up in healthy homes. For sure, I can think of a few of you who probably didn't get that type of voice in your household, and didn't also give it. But yeah, the eye rolling. These are rough though. Like name calling. I mean, even though like it took me a long time to realize, like even saying something like, you're such an asshole, which is for sure something that I used to say, is name calling, it's contempt, it's criticism, it's all these terrible things. You can't do that. You can't do it ever, even like if you're with someone who continually makes you think what an asshole they are, then you gotta, man, this isn't the relationship for you. Okay. So number 3 is defensiveness. And it says it's typically response to criticism. So if someone were to ask a question, this is the example. Did you call Betty and Ralph to let them know that we're not coming tonight as you promised this morning? And the defensive response is, I was just too darn busy today. As a matter of fact, you know how busy my schedule was. Why didn't you just do it? Right? So it's immediately, this is saying that it's a response to criticism, but what this really screams out to me is like being really, really insecure. And maybe there's been a pattern in the relationship of not being believed, not being respected. And that's what's being played out. But probably the initial insecurity is from childhood and that insecure attachment from our primary caregivers. And so feeling like always being under attack, no one believes me, no one thinks I'm good enough. Just saying like, oh, shoot, call them. That is 100% my fault. Let me do that right now. I was so busy, right? So that's where we respect our own selves. We can admit when we're wrong. We don't need to, it's our ego that wants to always be right and blame others and say, you know how busy I am. You know I couldn't have done it. And when we have like this strong sense of worthiness deep within us from the inside, then it's much easier to own our mistakes and just say, oh, my fault. And I really think that saying my fault has been one of the best habits that I've ever been able to get into. I think it's always best to own something that has gone wrong. Just own it. You know what? I could have done this better. I could have done that better. Even if it's not our fault, it's really like the stronger position, and it helps resolve the thing much more quickly, because then we're not putting other people on the defensive as well. So, yeah, defensiveness, especially, I think, is like a lot about making it all about you instead of the other person. So usually people just want to feel heard, and they want to feel like you care about them and that you're holding space for how they're feeling. And defensiveness is like, I can't hold space for how you're feeling or doing, but let me keep talking about how I'm feeling and doing. So that's defensiveness. And number 4, this was like my number 1 go-to. And I can think of one ex-boyfriend in particular. No, 2, maybe 3. Okay, all of them. Who this habit of mine drove them nuts. So let me know if this was one of yours as well. Number 4 is stonewalling. And it says, which is usually a response to contempt. So stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the interaction, shuts down, and simply stops responding to their partner. Rather than confronting the issues, people who stonewall can make evasive maneuvers such as tuning out, turning away, acting busy, or engaging in obsessive or distracting behaviors. So this is like when we just kind of try to ignore problems and hope that they're going to go away. This is not going to lead to a long-lasting and like intimate partnership. So they give an example of, instead of stonewalling, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the interaction, it's best to just ask for a break. Like, hey, I'm feeling flooded with emotions. Could we take a break for half hour and come back to it? Like, I really do want to solve this conflict with you, but let's come back to it. So, but stonewalling is really, I really think of it as being another form of contempt, because there's a way that we can pretend like the conflict doesn't exist and just go away mentally and become aloof. And then we can just go watch TV or do some sort of other project, or like this says, pretend to be busy. And to me, it's really dehumanizing to your partner or to the person that you have the conflict with. It's like, oh, guess what? You don't exist. This doesn't exist, and your feelings aren't important to me. So to me, stonewalling is often full of contempt and dehumanization. And oftentimes that we learned it just because that's how we were treated. So it's not to demonize any of you who may do stonewalling. Like I said, I used to be an expert. And, for me, when I was a child, my caregiver, some pretty volatile emotions that would come up during stressful times. And there always seemed to be a lot of stressful times. And so my coping strategy was just to like kind of disappear, dissociate, go up into my head, leave the room, go read a book, go do something else. So that became my coping strategy also as an adult. And so I would find emotionally volatile people to be in relationships with often. And then I would just check out in my head once things, emotions got really intense. So great. Well, Let me know any insights that you may have had, or any thoughts or any resources, and I'll see you again on Monday.